toutes et à tous. Je me réjouis d'être là après quelques années. I'm very happy to be back here and thank you for the invitation. I'm looking forward also to the discussion. So when we don't have time for questions now, we certainly can discuss this afternoon. What I will do is I will run through a series of slides and I will be careful. Does it run now? No, it doesn't. Okay. So I will go through the slides very fast. The presentation is designed in such a way that I can actually cut it off at any time. So I will introduce the pedagogy that we work with very large numbers of people. And as Klaas already said, we are responsible at EPFL with the Alice Lab for the first year design course, which is a course which starts with about 300 students and where we construct actually one-to-one projects with way over 200 students. So the big question is, of course, how can you co-design with such large numbers of people? And the question, and it's very nice to be actually talking with the Guillaume, is how can we actually reconnect between one another, but of course also in the processes that concern our existence on Earth. So in that sense, we have on the one hand side the research activities, which you can see here, a few PhDs mentioned that also link then to the teaching activities that we're working with. If I could now have the next slides, it's very important for me to mention that we are many. Oh, la police est complètement changée, mais c'est pas grave. So we are many, if we can have the next slides, a group of teachers and researchers, and I just continue because otherwise it's a bit difficult if I cannot. It really doesn't work now. Okay, so we worked since 2008 with one-to-one structures first with smaller groups. So everything I show you is a kind of an evolution over time here in London with an installation that interacts with the tide next. In Zermatt, there's the Matterhorn just on the left, always with one-to-one structures in quite extreme conditions where we always seek the exposure also to the public, very diverse public as you will see. And then when we took over the first year course in 2010, which is now a few years as you can say, we had to go back to the model scale first because of course with 300 students we didn't dare to directly go there and work with large models, but what was always important is that there's a collective aspect of co-design in the project, so we never proposed a condition, let's say, on a tabula rasa plot of land, but always in interaction of projects between one another. We then started again to work with one-to-one scale in an exercise that we call elements, and this happens as first year course. These exercises you will see out here happen after four weeks in first year. So this is after 7 weeks of studies in this particular case. And we worked again with the idea that the public space and exposure of the students to the actual conditions in the cities here specifically are very important, that even a very small project now, as you can see, is one of my favorite little elements there, which interconnects the people with the city, with the landscape, that you can also see here. But we aimed again for the one-to-one structures, and exactly that's when we started in 2016 actually it was, to ask the question, is it possible to do one project with over 200 co-designers and co-constructors? So this project is designed and constructed. I'm very impressed, Guillaume, by the quickness of your workshops, really beautiful the projects you show. And I always thought we were fast, but actually this was one semester, so we had 14 weeks. And how do you enable such structures, as you can see here, to be co-designed by so many people and also co-constructed by so many people? That was actually the question at heart. So I will go through a series of concepts. These are the later structures where we also started to much more interact with the territory. and always in support with many, and of course also class. We have the privilege to be able to also work with engineers, because we couldn't do such structures in the context of Europe without the proper engineering behind it, also in terms of responsibilities and security questions. So the mission we see as a lab is, if I can have the next slide, how can we engage the operational capacities of architecture with all its tools that we learn in order to exactly collaborate between one another. So instead of just sitting at our desk behind our computers, to literally interact via architecture, via the tools of architecture, but also via the construction of architecture. And how can we use these means in terms of reconnect to the societies, but also to the material cycles, to the public space, and do that. Therefore, always work in a public condition, on public spaces, often in conditions where a public space doesn't work or hasn't been assumed as such yet, where we tried with our students to activate places, very literally. So in that context, the question of fabrication or intelligent fabrication is, of course, drawn in a very broad bow, where we literally include the questions of how can we together be intelligent, so how can we as a large group literally interact and build up knowledges between one another, and how all these questions link to material, social, economical and political processes. In order to do so, we did the first large-scale experiment in 2016, based on the idea that we need, in order to be able to construct together concepts that enable us to bring all these ideas and thoughts into a coherent framework that at the same time really admits for freedom. So in that sense, what is very important here, these projects are never based on a competition where we say, so we do first 100 projects and then we basically say this is the best and we develop only that one. It's always based on an idea of collaboration where each moment of the architectural design process, so to speak, becomes an argument, like an articulation of an idea is an articulation that actually becomes a part of a discourse between many people. So in that sense, the way we are structured, we have 12 studios in this particular case, but each studio inside had a dialogue about how to develop a part of the project, which at the same time was in interaction with 12 other or 11 other projects. The size of the project is 11 by 11 by 11 meters, so quite substantial. And you can imagine that the idea of even engineering a platform at 10 meters height within a structure that is absolutely not holding up any much more than itself is quite complex. And what we found out actually is that such a process could never be guided by a top-down principle, but it was in fact literally through the interaction of the engineers, of the students between themselves, and via the architectural articulation of the projects directly, that this has been able to be constructed. So in that sense, quite literally based on the principle of protostructure, we've been able to bring together many, many people on, let's say, a common project based on the genetic code that we exactly introduced with this idea of protostructure. So it's basically a node, a genetic code that is able to be transduced in many, many ways and leaves the possibility for many projects to be assembled in one. These are quite wild animals, if you want to say so. So we have, after 28 weeks of collaboration of so many people, we have projects that are fully immersive, where people can actually start to inhabit these places. And we have, for instance, then, this was the first time, literally the reviews inside of those structures. So very similar to what you do also with your students within 2 weeks, which is really quite wonderful. So these moments give you an idea of where we go with our students within those 28 weeks. And I continue now just to go very briefly into some concepts. If we can have the next slides. By the way, there's another film. We shared the slides, and there's a film about the structure here, also in Versailles, because what you just saw was disassembled in the same summer and brought here and reassembled. You mentioned it at the same time. So I will now quickly talk about the pedagogical structure, so you can imagine how this actually works. It's based on a series of concepts that are also part of our research output. Some are directly PhDs, like protostructure, protofigure, or protochoreographies, while as others are simply outcomes that have a link with our pedagogical structure. Scaffolding time, of course, if you have so many people, it is absolutely essential to be very clear what you do when. So our students receive on the first day, so they're first year students, so they receive this from us, and sometimes are slightly amazed, which is basically the structure of 28 weeks. We call it scaffolding time, where we have every moment clearly defined, and also is for us as a big team kind of a map navigating through the semester, where we define all the lectures, the outcomes. It's almost working like a recipe over 28 weeks, where we basically give the instructions of how we as a team work, but also as the students work between themselves and what kind of output they produce. I have a few copies here, so I can share them after the lecture with you. Then we insist, of course, on the tools of architecture, as I just said in the beginning. So we have to teach, of course, everything from the start, but we believe strongly in the capacity of students also to learn between themselves. So all these tools that you know very well are part of those first weeks when they get into the semester. So drawing, model building, they very soon also start with the digital tools, and I don't make a specific point about the difference or non-differences of tools. Tools are essential, and any tool has to be an important aspect in how you actually produce projects, and each has an influence of what's coming out. So this is a collective drawing of 250 projects around the United Nations neighborhood in Geneva, which then led to many projects actually being constructed. And of course, the physical tools themselves are very important as well. So most of our structures are built, I would say, by 90% handcrafts. The concept of protostructure is absolutely essential in that, and in the beginning of the presentation there's a scientific article that talks about all the layers that are important in protostructure, which is basically a concept that transfers, that literally creates an interface between the conceptual world and the physical world in a very literal way, while engaging all the entanglements that come with it as large groups of people, but also material entanglements of cyclic constructions and so on and so forth. And we define it as very literally a structure in protostate. So the original protostructures were always so light and so fragile that they could never hold up any project as a shelf, but only work once you start to literally transform them into let's say a structure that almost starts to disappear within the projects, and basically give this sort of initiation of the project while not yet being fully a structure. So this capability of literally transmitting between these worlds actually works in a lot of senses, also in a metaphorical way, where for instance, how you start to articulate the arguments as design projects become a natural process at the same time. So in that sense, it literally brings the production of space into social, economical, and political processes. So this is actually very experiential. So let's say the theory behind it is also one that is once you're on site, and the class can say a lot about it, and Paul, who I think is somewhere back there as well, is a process that is a constant way of dialogue, a constant way of building up arguments together in order to construct a small piece of public commons together. There's a PhD for those who would be interested in going back there. All of that you can find on the InfoScience webpage at EPFL. Here with the hint that we started with these matrices in the beginning when we started first year. And there's publications. There's a book with Park Books called All About Space 2, the House 1 catalog, which very meticulously outlines all these concepts, and with literally thousands of documents shows how House 1 was done, and literally shows all the instances on all levels how we have been putting together the structure you have been seeing before. And again, there's a complete mix between digital media, handmade drawings, the physical construction, mock-up designs, and so on and so forth. Very important part in all of that is, of course, the collective moment. So we work at the same time in developing the project with very large models, which we use as a basis then also with external experts, where we discuss these projects again and again. And these moments of collective discourse basically then lead to the full-scale constructions. Here in Evian, we did a whole series. It was about 10 projects directly embedded in the territory, lead to projects that basically hold the grains of all these discussions as an embodied experience finally inside and for our students, but of course also for the public who is then exposed to that. That is just below La Grange de Patrick Bouchin, that you might know in Evian, which is home of a music festival where these structures were also becoming part of. And here, just a short image of the Cour de la Fontaine that you know very well, with the structure, with the collaboration with Cédric Libert and Edouard Cabet, who was at the time in our lab, and with Cédric we actually collaborated quite a few times also afterwards. This drawing shows exactly this interaction of the protostructure. It's a bit light, but the interaction of the protostructure with the project, or vice versa. So what is black is what we basically injected in the beginning in the project, and all the rest is what has been developed in discussion with the students. And here you can see, for instance, that this is a terrace at 10-meter height that was accessible, and this terrace was only possible as all the project below would fully support it in a physical way. Proto figure, I quickly go into a few. I really don't want to overrun. How much did I already do? Oh no, I'm doing quite well. All right, so I will go through that through that as well. For us, it's very important that the link, and there may be the link to what Guillaume also presented in the beginning, that these projects, whereas the House 1 condition was of course consciously a very abstract condition within this cube, we think it's extremely important that the projects are being rooted in the places where we work. So the very first day our students are literally exposed to the territory, and we work with what we call proto-figures. These are basically vectors that allow to think the territory not as fragments, but as also continuities. And we, for instance, we will see this a bit later, also create new connections between places that today are completely apart. It's very interesting. This is the Rhone in Geneva, absolutely fantastic space, natural space. These two municipalities today are really far apart. It takes about 45 minutes of walk, and also by car because everything is congested as well. Whereas up until the 1920s, there was a small ferry boat just with river craft going back and forth, which means at the time with absolutely no energy we have the connection. So it's about these very small gestures that could actually change the understanding of how a territory works. And we inject this in the beginning as a tool, and there's again a PhD that comes with it that of course links into the questions of how we inscribe our habitats into territory. And these figures that in history often were also linked to rituals actually have an essential meaning in terms of how we can start to understand the territory. I cannot go into that more in detail, but here you see a few notions out of that PhD where you see, for instance, the question of the nomos is very important, and how very literally, for instance, Gado and the Cumanos were inscribed into the territory in the very early days of the Romans, which then already starts to become much more a colonial tool in their own history. All this you can find, again, in InfoScience. There's articles about these terms and concepts which go much deeper into the details than I can do it here. Again, proto-figure as a tool, so this is what we injected in the first day with our students a few years back. In 2021, I think this one was, where you see exactly this connection that I mentioned before. And what then happens is literally our students go in, now not groups, one group of 300, but groups of about 25, 30 students into the territory, and literally start to experience measuring the territory as such. And this example that I show now, I think is very beautiful. So they literally swam across the river in order to measure this condition of the width of the river along the vector that we showed. And I think to do that on the first day in your architecture studies is a pretty good experience. Then photos and tools that emerge from there or have been used to do it. Photos from the students and the montage. And with that, linking then at the same time to how you map, how you draw these experiences, how you translate what you experience bodily into documents, 2D documents. Of course, it's an essential experience as well that brings you in this context. And then we work a lot with digital whiteboards where we collect all the material into kind of a coherent atlas that shares all these moments in very multiple types of documents. At the same time, with the research lab, we also integrate these experiences into GIS and mixed media experiences. So for us, and in all that I show and all our research, what is also extremely important is transcalarity. So we literally always, when we draw a detail, try to think about the territory and the planet. I mean, I know it's a bit pushing, but I think it's so essential. We try modestly. And these slides here very literally show from the territory that it's all the same file down to a little stair. It's 60 centimeters wide. It's the same drawing. You can literally zoom in, and it always develops further and further. And it's a fantastic tool. So I very much encourage you to work with QGIS, for instance. It really gives you such a powerful set of tools at your hands. I quickly also go into that aspect because in terms of how we work together, it's very important. Proto-choreographies is basically about how we interact with each other with tools, concepts, and people. Here I show a project that we built on the campus that is not an ephemeral project, but literally a public space project, which is the Place Gozonde. It's the big square at the EPFL campus, where proto-choreographies focus on the fact of how we interact in space with one another and how we include those movements and attentions literally in the design process has a clear influence on how we actually design together. So it's very basic in a certain way, you know, how if we have, for instance, a big model, as you just saw in the image before, and then how we interact with these different items together has a very big impact on what comes out. We work with very large, it's a drawing of 3 by 4 meters, where you literally interact with the drawing, and that led finally to proposals. Again, a group of 30 students designed this project in 5 weeks. Over 30 students and actors, and it's basically this whole square here, where we developed the whole design of the square itself, plus this Agora based, you probably know the buildings around there. It's actually a funny anecdote I quickly tell you about it, because the then president went to those 3 famous architects, Kuma, Perot, and Sana, to design a square, but each of them actually wanted to highlight their own building and didn't think so much about the rest, and he was not satisfied. So he came to us with the simplest brief we ever had, and was just bring life to the square. I didn't show the images, but it was really deserted. So the learning center was in a deserted environment. No one went there. And the second part of the brief was do it with the community. So can you do that? And I thought, yeah, maybe we can. So we did it. And basically, once the first phase was opened, it was immediate. It immediately became a place of rencontre for the whole campus, and continues to do so. So now it's really a central part of the campus, and a bit later we were able to build this structure which actually reconnects the campus to the landscape. The lake and the mountains actually weren't visible anymore, and now if you are on campus, if you are in these conditions, all of a sudden you literally reconnect to the landscape. And yeah, it's very busy now. So that's the thesis that comes with it. And here just a few notions, and then I will stop, because otherwise we will not be able to see your students' work, and that will be terrible. I just put these as notions. I think for us as teachers, it's very important that we engage with these terms, and maybe in the afternoon we will have moments to do so. Criticality regarding the role of architecture and architects in today's societies. What are we responsible for? How can we act? How can we act with one another? I think is absolutely important. We aim at empowerment. I totally believe you as first year students, when I talk to my first year students, or any person actually has to be empowered in order to feel I can contribute, we can do things together. I think it's very important to always be aware how we as architects contribute to the entanglement in power relations. So we work literally a few meters from there. This is like a symbolic image of the state of the world. The commons, to always propose projects that are able to propose commons and interact with the public. The question of representation, how do we design architecture, for whom do we design architecture, what does it mean to propose architectures, absolutely essential. The public good, how can we improve what we establish together as a public accessible good. And finally, the question of critical practice. So I must say by now that we've done it a few years, I'm very happy about the fact that there are quite a few students that have been with us, are now quite successful architects who actually exercise, I would say, what I would call critical practice, and with very innovative new formats. I leave it here because I have 100 more slides, but that would take a bit long. Okay, thank you so much.